Hello, everyone. Welcome in, and thank you so much for joining us for our last webinar of the year. I've been looking forward to this one, so we're really glad that you could take the time to be here with us today. Just a couple of quick notes before we get started. We are recording the session and we'll be sending the recording out as soon as it's ready. Additionally, the chat and the Q&A are open, so feel free to say hi and tell us where you're coming from. And if you have any questions for our speakers at any point, just drop them in the Q&A box. We do have a lot of information to cover, but we'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end. And if we miss yours, we'll make sure to follow up after the webinar. We also want to hear from you during the session. You all face the same challenges that our security experts here do, so your perspective is really important to us. After each prediction, you'll see a quick pop-up poll, so take a second to vote and let us know whether you agree, disagree, or see something different. Today, we are walking through 10 cybersecurity trends that we believe will shape 2026. Things like the impact of AI, shifts in attacker behavior, third-party risk, and how exposure management is evolving. I'm joined by three of AttackIQ's security leaders, Paul Reed, our VP of Adversary Research, Pete Lubin, our Field CISO, and John Baker, who many of you may know from his work at MITRE, but is now leading our threat-informed defense program here at AttackIQ. Like I said, we have a lot to dig into, so we'll go ahead and get started with you, Pete.
Cool. Thank you very much. Again, thanks everybody for joining. For those newcomers, thanks for taking the time out of your day. We do have a ton of stuff here to talk about. I think this is going to be super interesting. Just to expand on interest just a tiny bit, I have two celebrities in the industry with me here. Several of you have probably seen or heard from Paul on one of these webcasts before. But Paul, if you just want to give us a quick who you are and why you're awesome, that would be great.
Oh, thanks, Pete. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Paul Reed, I'm the VP of Adversary Research here at AttackIQ. My team and I are responsible for providing the content that our product uses and helping our customers make sure that they're compensating, mitigating controls, or doing the things it needs to do to keep them protected. My background spans 25 plus years in cybersecurity, from everything from smart cards and PKS11 libraries to email and document security to biometrics, threat hunting, and now, of course, to the work I do here today at AttackIQ.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And the great and powerful John Baker. John, you want to give us a little background on yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think I might be one of Attack IQ's newest employees. Joined almost 2 months ago. I come from MITRE, where I created and led MITRE's Center for Threat Informed Defense for about 7 years. Super excited to be here with everybody on my first Attack IQ webinar officially, and kind of jump into some predictions for next year.
Cool. All right. Let's let it rip. So we have a couple of sort of categories, themes, if you will. Liz mentioned earlier in the thing, we're going to start out talking about the threat landscape, generally speaking. Of course, we're going to get into AI type stuff, like how could we not? That's the thing everybody's talking about and the things we're all losing sleep over. We're going to get into kind of the world of exposure management and maturation and these sorts of things through the lens of frameworks and so on. And then we're going to talk about some of the, sort of vendor specific third party risk type things. And we're just going to get going here. So I have a list of 10 predictions that we gathered amongst a couple of people. And we're just going to kind of go through them one by one, and we're going to riff, and we're just going to chat about it. So let's get going. Number one, adversary supergroups will turn cybercrime into a global franchise. This is a thing, a topic that's very interesting to me, and I'm sure very interesting to many other people. I think we'll start with Paul. Like, why do you think that's a thing we need to worry about?
Well, we've certainly seen it over the past little while with Laspis and Shiny Hunters and those groups coming together and kind of being like the first boy band of bad guys in security, right? Um, and they are a powerful team up, right? That you bring those knowledge bases together, it allows them to move more quickly and more efficiently. But as well, if you think about it from a pure economic standpoint, they're all bringing the things they're best at, right? So why do we trade with other countries? Because I'm the best at making this grommet and you make widgets, so I'll trade you my grommets for my widgets. We're going to see that happening now in cybersecurity. There's going to be groups who focus on certain things. What we always sometimes forget is we think these are faceless, nameless people, but really it's groups of people coming together under a common cause. We are human, we have our biases, right? My particular bias when I'm threat hunting is processes and network activity, not necessarily IAM. Same thing for threat groups, right? Threat groups know that we got a group of people who are really good at this. But if you think about it holistically on how we have risen the bar on cybersecurity and cyber resiliency, you've got to be good in many areas now to be successful. And I think that's why we're going to see more and more of these groups coming together because they recognize they have blind spots, right? And how do you fill those blind spots? Well, you find people who complement you. I think that's what we're going to see happening. I think the other thing too, the ease of use of putting their knowledge into, agentic things and AI things, we'll talk about this a bit more, is just going to make it easier for them to come together. And as well, the money aspect of it is to a level now that, I'd rather have a third of $100 million than zero of, $10 million. So I think there's a lot of that driving it as well. And then, of course, just the sharing of information and the pace of information sharing is increasing. So one group can't keep up on all the CVEs we're finding and all the 0 days. They need support. So I think that's what's going to happen over the next little while.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it kind of comes down, as you said, to economics. I think there's a few examples that we can point to of groups where, they've conducted a successful campaign, and then shortly after it, their tools and capabilities are available for hire, basically, for other teams to use. And it's just about the economics of it. It's just a natural evolution as capabilities get matured.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be interesting to see how this creates a sort of pecking order amongst, the supervillains and the sort of cronies in the space. And I'm interested to see how that's going to go. So, like all of that being said, like, how do we feel about this as far as like a defensive posture goes? Do we need to think differently or do differently? John, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think from a defender perspective, the sort of the bad news is um, it's going to be a lot easier or continue to get easier and easier for sort of less sophisticated groups to reuse tools, resources, capabilities, services from other groups. So that's on the bad news side. But I think, and coming at it from like the threat informed defense perspective, there's also opportunity here. So it is actually about tool reuse, service capability reuse fundamentally. And that gives us a hook, a thing to focus on and to orient our defenses against.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Um, So I'm going to shift to prediction two, and like I said, we got a lot of these to get through, so I'm going to move. But because it just makes sense for us to discuss this, because it's sort of the next sort of logical or meta understanding of what it is that we're talking about. The prediction is that cybercrime will go corporate. This is something I say a lot, and I actually wrote this one down as one of my predictions. So um, so we just talked about adversary supergroups and sort of these alliances and the reusability and the pace of change and the pace of evolution and maturity and capability. When you say those things out loud, it sounds a lot like what you would say in the context of an enterprise. We want to mature, we want to scale, we want to spend money wisely, et cetera, et cetera. So, going back to Paul having said, like, I'd rather have this slice of that amount of money than zero of this amount of money. That's essentially, financing. You're running a book, right? You're doing R&D. You have affiliate programs. You have quarterly revenue goals. I know it sounds insane to think about, but think about it, right? Like you're going through all this work and you're risking, essentially your freedom to do bad things for financial gain. You should probably do it in the most organized, efficient way as is possible, right? Why not? John, what are your thoughts on that?
100% agree with this one. So nothing controversial on this to me, Pete. I think I'd even add that, if you kind of go beyond just cybercrime and you start to think about, sort of the nation states that are behind it, um, obviously we know when you get to like the sort of APT groups that they already have this corporate structure in place. They have working hours. And it's just natural to see that kind of starting to evolve on the cybercrime side as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It'll be interesting to see if there winds up being an overarching board of directors of cybercrime who's, getting quarterly profit reports and so on.
Well,
Yeah,
I also realize as I say that I might have sounded like there's more of a distinction between cybercrime and like the APT, like nation state actors, because that also that distinction is kind of going away more and more as nations are seeing opportunities to fund nuclear weapons programs and that sort of
Right.
thing, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And the best part for the bad guys is they don't have an HR department to keep them from doing nasty things. Paul, any thoughts on that?
Well, it's actually funny that you mentioned HR departments. I think in some of the latest leaks we've seen coming out of these super groups and criminal organizations, they have a lot of the same problems we do in corporate today, right? There's internal feud, there's castle building, there's this is mine, that's not yours, keep your hands off of this. I need credit for that, you're taking my credit, right? Um, I think that, for in some ways we may find that some of the malaise that we see in large organizations may start to infiltrate some of these groups. And what I find fascinating now, because of how they're setting themselves up, and we know about the whole North Korean IT worker thing, is there an opportunity now for myself and my friends to flip the tables and be the, North American bad guy plant who's going to go in there and sow discord inside the group and sabotage the code bases and crap like that? I don't know, right? How do we, they start become all the things that other corporations deal with, right? Could we do a takeover? Could we do a corporate raid? Like, I don't know. Could we do all the usual things you do in
Yeah.
our side of the world? I think one of the things, some of the darker side of this, we made a lot of light of this, but some of the darker side of this is, having friends in different parts of the cybersecurity world and also the physical security world, right? Some of these groups are now meeting up with, hardcore activists, right? We know that when Lapsus and Shiny Hunters came together, there was a concerted effort potentially to dox some of these large corporations and people and maybe do physical harm to them and their families. I had a number of my security people reach to me and go, hey, if you have any CISO friends, share this intel with them. And it really was around that area that these large cyber criminal groups are just not looking to do cyber damage, but physical damage, right? It's that whole cyber kinetic world. And, that worries me more than anything they're going to do to us in a cyber way. I just worry for people's safety.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The lines get blurred very, very quickly when the goal is profitability.
Yeah.
Um, so sub prediction for that one: cybercrime supergroups will need HR departments before the next year is out. All right, cool. Now we're going to move into what the bulk of our topic is, and of course it's AI centric. Why shouldn't it be? All right. So the prediction is AI agents will become the most dangerous employees on your network. That sounds extremely ominous and very, very scary. But everybody is moving at light speed to deploy agents, internal LLM endpoints, data layers, et cetera, et cetera. Like the concentric rings just grow and grow and grow. And so you could see how something like that would, grow out of control over time. Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
So, having spent the past several months looking at this and seeing the pace of development and the ease of development for things like MCPs, agents, use of LLMs, a lot of people in other companies that I talk to, they're like, we've never shared information as quickly as we do today, right? I want something in finance. Finance goes, I know what you need. You need an MCP. Let me spin one up and pop it up on my screen for you, right? It's just so easy to do and so fast to do. We've made the availability of data, you know, just the friction of getting data from other groups is very small now. And that can be a very positive thing. The flip side is what are the controls, right? When we used to share data before, we had DLP, we had classification and content marking, we had portion markings, right? We had data diodes and things like that. What do we have for MCPs and agents? I can just imagine, if I'm a bad guy, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hop on the network and I'm going to, run a scan looking for MCPs, looking for exposed LLMs, looking for agents, and use that, right? I don't have to hack anything, right? As we know today, people don't break in, they log in or they steal in, right? So the ability to get credentials today is pretty simple. You just pay enough money, you can get in anywhere, or you just offer enough money, a la CrowdStrike and you got access. So once you're in, am I going to take the risk of running some well-known malware? Am I going to take a risk of doing some live off the land, or am I just going to do a quick scan and find that MCP and start talking to it and exfiltrating all the data I want? That's what
Yeah.
we're.
Yeah, Paul, I think it's always, about the path of least resistance, right? And as we build agentic systems, we're introducing tremendous complexity, and we're doing it so fast. I was actually talking to somebody the other day about kind of one of my pet things. I'd like to have a sort of an attack MCP out and available as sort of like ground truth on kind of all knowledge on MITRE ATT&CK. And I was talking to somebody who's sort of prototyping this capability on his own. He's like, yeah. I've been kind of creating this capability, but at this point, there's no guardrails or any security put into it at all. And you know what happens? Eventually, that thing ends up getting shipped,
Yep.
and then
Yeah.
security's added on afterwards. So it's the sort of same classic problem we've all had, except what's happening right now is people are just going faster and faster. And people maybe without the security expertise are empowered because it's so much easier to go faster, right? And so then it just creates that much broader path or opportunity of low resistance for attackers. And even yesterday, I was reading a couple of articles, case studies that are kind of going into research on MITRE Atlas, and two of the four case studies we're looking at were about how attackers are sort of fooling MCPs or leveraging MCPs to achieve their goals. One was for C2, one was um, sort of tricking MCPs by introducing sort of malicious tools into the MCP. So, lots and lots of opportunity. Adversary is going to be creative and follow that path of least resistance for sure.
Yeah, for me, when I think about this, old and busted is shadow IT. The new hotness is shadow AI, right? That's going to be the thing that everyone's going to be worrying about. And how do we control shadow AI? Uh,
Right.
I think the proliferation of that is going to be a big talking point next year.
Yeah, for sure. So everything that's old is new again, right? Path of least resistance, bang for buck or time spent versus dollars made, et cetera, et cetera. Like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So interestingly enough, that segues really nicely into the next thing, right? The prediction is AI will force defenders and adversaries to abandon their playbooks. This hits home for me, having run operations teams in the past. It was hard enough previously to sort of codify methodologies defensively and sort of build good programs that were defensive in nature. And now the tables are turned or the script is flipped, so on and so forth. John, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Pete, this is one obviously that I kind of put together this prediction. And, the way I look at it is, over the course of 2025, at the beginning of the year, we saw the Google Gemini team do some really cool reporting on how they had seen adversaries abusing Gemini. So, this is public model that's available for everybody. So you got to assume it's happening also in, private models or, and other venues where we don't have visibility. So you can see that. And then as the year progressed, we started to see reporting from Anthropic about kind of a progression supporting ransomware attacks that eventually got to, I think the report was maybe in September, October, I forget the time frame, where an entire ransomware attack was sort of driven by an actor using AI. AI was doing all of the actual operations for the attack, and so it goes from this companion and research assistant to basically this powerful capability that's operating. And so we saw that progress so far this year, and I think when you put that together, you start to realize that you kind of lose some of the constraints that like the human developer or the human operator had. It's like, I know what I know. Paul knows some different things, but when you start to bring all that knowledge together in the way an AI agent might have access to it, it allows the AI to have a much more diverse playbook. I've executed this TTP. I'm now, have these capabilities. What next? There might be a preferred path, but it's going to have knowledge of a bunch of other paths too. So I think that means that attacker playbook really becomes much broader in the set of tools that they can reuse and leverage. Going back to the reuse conversation from before, I think from a defender perspective, it means we really have to shift from kind of the era of focusing on patching and vulnerabilities and chasing the next 0 day to understanding kind of defense in depth. How do we properly segment our networks? How do we ensure we have good mitigating, compensating controls in place that'll be robust to variances in adversary behavior, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. The hive mind
Yeah.
gets even more scary when you take people out of the picture. Like I hate to say it, politics and corporate world, tends to slow things down and give people an ability to reflect, or at least the meritocracy does the same thing. A hive mind and doesn't care about any of that stuff. Paul, what do you think?
Um, the AI aspect of being leveraged to conduct attacks, that's just our new normal.
Yeah.
Um, we are seeing, which is somewhat worrying, is the use of AI to find 0 days and to do software evaluation to find buffer overflows and things like that. That worries me more. A lot of the current attacks being done by AI is really the automation, choose your own adventure style, right? I'm going to start down this path and I'll roll a six, I'll go to this page or that page, right? Depending upon whether or not the defender has a certain mitigating, compensating control. That's scary, that's adaptive and very quick. The good news about those type of attacks is that a lot of them go back to what we've always talked about for so long. It's hygiene, right? Eat your vegetables, do the right things, get patched, have proper IAM, have custodial systems put in place, right? Have multi-factor, right? So a lot of that helps with some of that automation and that. Where it gets worse is now, the threat actor spends time, just like in a corporation, getting to know their client, or in this case, their victim, and go, oh yeah, they use this particular type of edge device running this version, right? Hey, Mr. AI, here's the firmware for this version. What do you see? Right? That's where it gets really worrisome. And that's something that I think we're going to see more and more of is we're going to see more bespoke attacks where in general, as the EPT groups had the time and the money to take and do the bespoke stuff, I think the super groups, the corporations, and the use of AI is going to allow them to target us a lot more effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting from a CISO perspective. While difficult to do, we always used to worry about things like MTTD, mean time to detect, mean time to respond.
Yeah.
That becomes even more important now, especially when we start to talk about concepts about, AI's mean time to execute or AI infiltrate or what
Yeah.
move laterally, like whatever it is. Nanosecond scale stuff becomes real scary to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, one thing that we see though is while if you look at like change in the MITRE attack corpus is like an indicator for sort of the establishment or identification of new adversarial behaviors, it's not like we're seeing an explosion in those behaviors, right? And so I think, what that means is, of course, new behaviors will be developed, identified, through research, that sort of thing. But I don't expect to see an explosion there. And so I think that means for the defender side, it gives us an opportunity to, we got to step up and be proactive. We need to kind of understand the set of behaviors that are relevant for our particular system, environment of concern, right? And be proactive. Because you will have that. I like the choose your own adventure idea, like sort of the adversary driven choose your own adventure, kind of conducting some operation. And, they're still going to be picking from, you're either going to chapter 6 or 7, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's still chapter 6, it's still chapter 7. We can figure out what those are because it's our systems. We should know them, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, the proactive nature of things is, I think, really it's so important to call out. We used to say there were two types of companies: those that whatever haven't got, or those have gotten hacked, and those who have but just don't know it yet. And that transitioned more into like there are two types of companies: those who are proactive in nature and those who are reactive in nature. The reactive thing is just not going to work anymore, but you don't have the time to react. So like proactivity, I think, is really going to be the theme going forward. Um, all right, the next one's pretty spicy. Um, uh, so the prediction is MITRE Atlas will outpace MITRE ATT&CK. For those of you who are not, MITRE people, MITRE ATT&CK, as you know, is the world's most comprehensive list of adversarial TTPs, and Atlas is essentially the equivalent, but through the lens of AI and AI techniques. Um, so, I mean, John coming straight out of MITRE, that might sting a little to hear something. I don't know, I'm just kidding, but what do you think about that?
I think if you look at the pace of change, honestly, absolutely, I agree with it because, as I said earlier, we're creating these systems that have tremendous complexity, and we're doing a ton of research as as a cybersecurity community to try to understand and identify the way adversaries can use these. But they're driven, financially motivated, and innovative too. And so as we go faster and faster towards AI and agentic systems, it's sort of inevitable that there'll be explosive growth there. I think I mentioned it a minute ago. I thought I was super cool and maybe in a bad way, but I just read a report about adversaries using an MCP server for C2. They're going to innovate as fast as we create capability to achieve their goals. And so I would expect there to be big growth there. One thing that I think though is important is like as we look at that example of MCP for C2, if attack, one of the reasons it's useful is it kind of sets in a layer of abstraction that makes sense to defenders, makes sense for threat intel researchers. Um, if you look at that level of abstraction, there already are in the attack corpus a set of techniques and sub-techniques that talk about C2, right? And so, maybe that's just a slight variant of an existing attack technique. So there's probably some like subjectivity. Does this fall in Atlas? Does it fall in attack? Is all I would hedge. But I do think we'll see a lot of new techniques around Atlas for sure.
Yeah. Paul, what do you think?
I I'm going to take the exact opposite of that coin. I think that um, you know, attack has served us really well, and I think attack lays the foundation in the future of how we talk about agentic threats. I think that we're going to see a larger focus on AI, and in turn, we're going to see Atlas grow at a faster pace than attack has. I think part of that will be the fact that we have a exemplar to look at in attack and go, hey, this is how we grew over time. If you think about when it first started out, what attack was to what it is today, my goodness, it has grown and matured so quickly because industry adopted it. I think we're going to see the adoption rate of Atlas be even faster for the simple fact that we know the value that attack brought us. Atlas is going to go faster. Second thing is people like things that are shiny, right? The attackers like shiny things too. So the attackers are going to spend their time on AI going, wait a minute, you're telling me if I spend 5 minutes on a prompt, I don't have to spend an hour doing reconnaissance? So, they're going to find new and innovative ways to do that. I think the other thing too is that some of and this is being asked in the questions, that some of the secondary infrastructure, and it's not really a great term to use secondary infrastructure, but some of the really legacy like OT SCADA stuff, right? We rush to connect that to the internet, rush to make it interconnective and things like that. And to be able to hack that, you need to have a certain amount of knowledge, right? Innate knowledge about controllers and things like that, right? With the advent of AI, if I grab the Schneider, manual for their control boards and I upload it to ChatGPT and go, hey, ChatGPT, I want to mess things up, where could I start? It's going to go, well, if you use this protocol, well, I don't know that protocol. Oh, well, here's how this protocol works. Hey, cursor, can you write me a Python that uses this protocol to achieve this goal from this document? Of course, I can do that for you, right? So I think the breadth of attack will also increase too. And I think that's another reason that will drive Atlas as well. There'll be a breadth of attack that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think MITRE and I think Attack and Atlas will merge like Voltron, and MITRE will have a new thing called Blazing Sword or something. that is a great union of two wonderful frameworks.
Since you said it, Pete, my hope is that they actually just merge
Yeah,
as Atlas matures a bit. And the reality is that those agents, all these different systems, they're running on same underlying infrastructure that we've all looked at for years and years. Attacks aren't just an attack on an AI system. There's all the stuff around it. So you need
right.
to be able to look at the whole picture anyways. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm hoping it all gets consolidated over time here.
yeah. I think when I think about it, so I guess the sort of meta question or sub question or whatever is like, does AI make it so that TTPs themselves change, or is it just TTPs enacted through, different methodologies, and therefore it's kind of like attack attack as an x-axis and Atlas as a y-axis, which is just a way to overlay, I guess methodologies of employing tactics, if that makes any sense. But I'm excited to see where this all goes. It's super crazy stuff. Um, okay. Um, so the next one might sound boring, but for anyone who's dealt with audit and who's had to deal with regulatory compliance and checking boxes and doing the annual blah blah blahs, this is an interesting topic. And so the prediction is that AI will replace point in time compliance with continuous validation. This is it hits home for me, having lived through many years of having to deal with regulatory commitments and audits and annual pen tests and all that other stuff. You know, you did those stuff, you did those things because you had to check boxes. You also did those things because it gave you the ability to do measurements and produce metrics to give to boards. All the stuff that that's been expected over the years, from an enterprise standpoint. You do it annually, you feel good that you've checked the box annually, and you go about your life. Obviously, things are changing. Things are moving in a much more rapid pace from an adversarial standpoint. Your defensive posture needs to be much more dynamic and much more flexible. Um, Will AI play a role in that? I mean, come on, it's impossible to say no to that, right? Um, when you think about the reason why you check those boxes is to prove that you have a defensive posture in place that is going to do what it's intended to do when it needs to do it when the time matters. If you're really doing your job as a CISO or as a practitioner, you're constantly thinking about that. You're constantly waking up every day and saying, are my controls doing what they're supposed to be doing? Can I sleep at night and feel good that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you think about that through the lens of how you apply AI to something like, oh man, we lost Paul. I'm sure he'll be there. Um, if you think about essentially, how AI applies to the ability to do that, like measuring live performance against things like MITRE ATT&CK as an example, constant control validation and constant remediation, and we'll get into more of that as we go forward in this. Yeah, I think it tends to make a lot of sense. John, like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, there are a couple of comments in chat asking about sort of, the defense side. We spent a few predictions there talking about the changes on the adversary side. Um, I am optimistic that we'll see a pretty significant acceleration and automation driven by AI adoption on the defense side. I think what's interesting to me is what's happened as sort of a community. We are kind of like increasingly expecting, or kind of the norm is that the cybersecurity products that we have agents and AI capabilities that we can use to integrate with other systems. And so I think we're getting faster and better at connecting our systems to then be more responsive. Um, and so, honestly, Pete, I'm pretty optimistic. I think we're still going to have all of the sort of bumps and bruises along the road as we learn and AI systems mature. But the rate of maturity over the last year, I think, is a really solid indicator that we could get to a place where we do finally start to put aside the paper-based compliance systems. The reality, though, is we'll have to move the policy world along just as
Right.
fast and regulation. So I think from the technical side, totally doable.
Sure.
From the policy side and kind of regulation side that kind of drives that paper-based process. Um, I'm not so sure we're going to get that part fixed in time to really deliver on that prediction for the year. So I
Yeah.
think it's two answers from my perspective.
Yeah, it's good points. Like I've been quoted as saying compliance is not security, and I stand firmly behind that. But the other thing about compliance, if you've lived in that world or currently live in that world, is the regulations change, rapidly. I'll use the term rapidly. But when the regulations change, the levels of ambiguity in how they change is almost indecipherable for a human being. We've seen that chat and other AI models and so on and so forth don't necessarily do super well with ambiguity. They have this great tendency to sort of fill in the blanks. And when it comes to checking regulatory boxes, filling in the blanks is probably not what you want. Now that's now, like we're talking about next year, we're talking about a few years down the road. You could systematize anything if you put enough money and resources and effort behind it. I don't know. I guess we'll see on that one. Paul, we lost you there for a minute, but
Yeah,
if you want
sorry
to
about that. My
you want to
apologies.
jump in on the compliance thing, feel free.
Yeah, to me, when I think of things like Dora and NIST,
Hmm.
um, we have a list of things we need to do, right? You need to do these things, you need to do these things. And if you don't do these things, then you get these fines. I think what's going to have to happen to those type of frameworks is they're going to have to change to be you need to be protecting and testing against these things for an outcome because of the dynamic nature that we now live in. Simply saying I did this is not going to be good enough, right? At
Right.
this moment in time, that best practice put out by Dora, by NIST, whatever it is, we follow that and we feel good about it, but really it's a false sense of security. We need to turn those into dynamic frameworks that update frequently, and we have a way to keep compliance with them as we adopt a continuous testing mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. It's funny how we always run into these things in cybersecurity and in other aspects of technology is the ones who make the rules are still living, 10 years in the past and we're trying to live 10 years in the future. There's some gravitational pull, I guess, coming soon that's going to hopefully, drag those things a little closer together. But I guess we'll see. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Enough about AI nonsense. It's fad anyway. Um, let's get more into sort of like frameworks and exposure management, these sorts of things, because these are hot topics, and not only in sort of the third party space and people trying to sell you solutions, but as far as rethinking the way we do traditional cybersecurity and aspects of it. So this prediction is in 2026 will be a breakout year for vulnerability discovery, straining defenders, and the CVE ecosystem. Um, it's an interesting topic because it represents two sides of a coin that could either be positive or negative depending on who you are and how you look at them. John, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So in my career, I at one point used to oversee the CVE team at MITRE. And I've seen CVE sort of issuance and kind of the federated model for managing CVE issuance evolve tremendously over, the past 20 years, I guess. In the early days, you'd see like 6,000 new CVEs issued a year. Last year, I think we saw maybe around 38,000, I think, CVEs issued. Looks like this year we're trending towards 45 to 50,000 CVEs issued. And, that's enabled by kind of efficiency that's been built into the system, the federated model that's been developed by MITRE and the community there. But I got to go back to AI, unfortunately. There's been so much research and effort into using AI to develop new code, to identify vulnerabilities and software weaknesses in code, and we're making tremendous progress there. And so I think, the good news is I think that we're going to get a pretty significant growth in the issuance of new CVEs because we're going to find many more vulnerabilities. That's good. We're finding them. Um, but I think the bad news is thinking about it from the perspective of all of us defenders, we're already overwhelmed. Like nobody can handle 45,000 CVEs a year and prioritizing and patching and fixing all of those things. um, we might see double that next year, right? And if we're already strained, it's just going to break down. And I think actually it's going to be really hard for the basic system that does CVE issuance to kind of scale to that demand. So CVE backlog will grow. Um, and pressure on our vuln management teams and our security teams to prioritize and figure out what to fix, what to focus on, what really matters, is just going to ramp up tremendously over the next year or so. And so I think, as I said, it is a good news, bad news thing. We want to find the vulnerabilities. We want to fix them. Hopefully, maybe some of this will start to lead to, better secure development life cycles that are proactively identifying and fixing things before it ships, right? But in the meantime, we've got a lot of code out there that has vulnerabilities, and we're going to get much better at finding it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I think John's touch on the software development life cycle is going to be key here. Again, for a lot of companies, it was not necessarily always easy to find their own, exploitable edges, right? Because they're too close to it. They can see it too closely. I think some of the new automated SDLCs that are coming out, where they're actively looking for buffer overflows, looking for, free before you use memory, things like that, is certainly going to help. I think the other thing that's going to happen too is, again, with AI making it so easy to do this, as John predicted, the rapid expansion of CVEs is going to take place because we've commoditized the ability to do this, right? You read some of the forums on bug bounties and people talking about how do I get into bug bounties? It used to be, well, go learn some low-level machine stuff and some assembly and then come back when you're done. Now it's like, here's a prompt,
Yeah.
right? So that's where we're at. And again, as I touched on earlier, some of those side systems, those OT SCADA systems, those IoT systems, right? Think about the prevalence of the chipsets out there, right? That are just reused over and over again in so many devices. Someone finds a CV in one of those, there could literally be billions of devices all of a sudden that how do you patch your coffee maker, right? You can't, you throw it out. So I think we're going to have to start thinking about things a little bit differently when it comes to that. And I think the CVE systems are going to have to mature and grow, right? We know that there was some issues around, funding and who's leading it and who can be contributors and who can own them. I think we're gonna have to relook at that and see how do we expand that. And then again, we're also going to have to look at, everybody's going to be coming out with their own CVEs all the time now. And how do we validate that this one is more worse than the others? Because already, as has been perfectly highlighted here, our IT groups are already overwhelmed with what they need to get done, right? And it's really more about risk management now than complete coverage, right? If the lunch servers go down, do we lose $1 million? If our production systems that can't make a widget goes down, we're going to lose millions of dollars. So we're going to prioritize those. So it's only going to get worse, I think, for those people, and we need to find a way to help them better prioritize that and better identify the CVs they have. There may be a whole new line of software that does nothing but continuous validation. And we're going to talk about this shortly, but continuous validation of all the devices on your network, constantly learning, constantly probing, right? Because as things change and new learnings take place, the ability to put them together, I have a piece of data, you have a piece of data, John has a piece of data. Separately, they're not worth much. We put them together, they're worth a lot now. So I think we're going to see more of that.
Yeah, for sure. This is why I keep my coffee machine in a Faraday cage. But um, so there's a lot of points there that represent paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Um, from the perspective of a defender, those who run security organizations or lead security organizations, um, there's not a single one who's going to tell me that vulnerability management is not a nightmare. It is a problem at scale. It is a problem through the lens of prioritization. It is a problem through the lens of validation, ownership, cross-team collaboration. It goes on and on and on. That problem will just continue to grow. And so, the fear of exponential growth of that thing is definitely worth losing some sleep over. Um, but there is potentially light at the end of the tunnel, which is what we're going to get into right now. So our next prediction is that organizations will finally commit to systemic security maturity over quick fixes. Now this is huge. So we spoke earlier about proactive versus reactive. We talk about problems at scale, we talk about prioritization, um, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, okay, you're going to have to deal with that. You can't. This is not a situation where you bury your head in the sand and it goes away. It's obviously not going away. So, John, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I put this prediction together, and let me just first real quick address. I noticed in our poll, which I love that people are filling out the poll. We're getting like really solid response rates. That's awesome. Um, Hopefully, no one's losing sleep over organizations committing to security maturity over quick fixes. Maybe think of that second option as we're in it, we're doing it, we're a believer.
Good point.
But yeah, so my thought here, kind of building on what Pete was saying there, and kind of some of the stuff we've talked about so far. There's a lot of drivers that I think are going to kind of push organizations in the direction of kind of really shifting towards that sort of continuous sort of threat exposure management, the CTEM thing. One of the other realities is Gartner defined CTEM what in like 2023, I think, late
Mhm.
2023. So it's still relatively new, and we're now 2 years into that, and we're seeing more and more products, services starting to pop up to help organizations, and we're seeing more and more enterprises realizing that the way forward is to stop chasing every vulnerability and to start focusing on the set of exposures that matter most. I think when you look at it, it's like you have kind of a framework that's now been out for a couple of years. You've got services and products, and you've got security teams. So we now have like the set of ingredients there. And then you have the external pressures, the additional sort of pressure from automation on the attacker side. Even putting AI aside, attackers really finding ways to innovate and scale the impact of their attacks, increases in the volume of vulnerabilities, and the need to kind of manage the complex systems that we have. I think there's all these drivers that are leading us that way, and we have the ingredients, and I think we're starting to see teams actually have success with this too. So I think we're going to see a lot more adoption of CTEM, and maybe put the acronym aside for a second. Fundamentally, that shift in perspective to what are the exposures that matter most to me now, and how am I acting to address them, and let's systematize it, right? So let's
Yeah.
create a process that actually does that.
Yeah, if you've seen one of my earlier podcast webinars on this topic, exposure is not the same as vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is an aspect of exposure. It is important to consider all exposure and be able to prioritize and validate and remediate in a continuous cycle, which is what CTEM, tries to give you the framework to accomplish. Paul, what are your thoughts?
So I'm going to take this from a different perspective. I think one of the things that kind of go hand in hand in this is operationalizing your CTI. You can't do what you just said and John just said if you don't know your adversaries and who's targeting you, right? It's not good enough anymore to get a report that says, people in your industry, right? Okay, well, my industry is pretty big and we're pretty diverse, right? I'm not $5 billion bank. I'm a local, $150 million community bank, right? The adversaries are going to be different. The number of times I've had customers reach out to me and go, "Oh my gosh, we just read about, uh, one of the latest attacks coming out of China." They're like, "We're going to be targeted next." Like, they don't even know who you are, right? And so we go and look at their actual threat exposure. It's like it's the guy down the street with the commodity ransomware that's probably going to do you harm than the big bad threat actor out of China. So I think it's really important for us to know our threat posture, our threat exposure, and then feed that as part of the CTEM to do that prioritization, right? If I have threat actors who are going to exploit vulnerabilities in Fortinet or some other edge device, then I'm going to focus on that. If I have ones who are going to try to social engineer my help desk, then I should be focusing there, right? I should be doing more training there, more redundancy there, self-service resets, things like that. I think that's going to be a very, very big part of it. And then the whole concept of, quick fixes, right? We've been putting bandages on things for way too long, right? In some points, the patient doesn't know it's dead yet because we just keep putting more and more bandages on it. We're going to have to stop doing that and take a more holistic approach as we're talking about here. I also think too, when we start thinking about this in a wider context on what that could possibly mean for us, is, it goes back to my comment earlier about doing your vegetables, right? We got to get off this sugar high, right? There's that adrenaline rush of there's a CVE. I'm going to stay up all night and patch it. Look what I did. We're more secure. Great. But what didn't you do, right? What was the opportunity cost of you doing that didn't get done? So we got to move away from the sugar highs and go eat more vegetables.
Well said. Well said. Good. All right. Moving on to the last sort of theme here, in reference to sort of service offerings and vendors and third-party risk management and all these good things. The ninth prediction is that supply chains will become the number one access point for adversaries. Now, I cooked this up in a fever dream, having dealt obviously if you're a SolarWinds customer, if you assuming you're still a SolarWinds customer, I don't know why you'd be, but if you're a SolarWinds customer at the point of time, where they had their incident. Um, that was probably a wake-up call. It was always something that was theoretically possible and a thing that we discussed, and around the water cooler that we worried about. But when you see it happen and you see the blast radius and the concentric rings of sort of what happens as a result of something like that, a light bulb goes on somewhere. And it starts to make you think. You also saw things in the news about, other companies, and I won't name names, where they accidentally hired actors from North Korea. Whoops. Um, how could you possibly defend against something like that? When everything is done over Zoom, agentic deep fakes and all that good stuff make it very, very simple for you to look like a human being when you're not. Like all these terrifying things, right? I know a lot of this is tinfoil hatty, but the point is, when an attacker can focus on an attack vector where one successful campaign can expose hundreds, if not thousands, of customers, users, enterprises, that sounds like a pretty good deal as opposed to spray and pray tactics or script kiddie tactics or commodity malware, right? It's a thing that I worry about. Paul, being the adversary guy, like, what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
So supply chains, right? One of the things we've talked about for the longest time is that adversaries aren't going to go at your front door. They're going to go for the soft underbelly. And for a lot of areas, the supply chain is. And I'm actually going to cut a hole in some people's tinfoil hats right here and tell a quick story. 3 years ago, my threat hunt team and I were working with a large Western nation looking at their overall threat posture, right? Who was targeting their government agencies and who were the threats. And we saw a large number of them being targeted constantly, right? It was literally tilting at the windmill, running at the front door, trying to bash shit in with your head. And as we sat around the table and talked, I'm like, look, they're not having success here. They're going to move somewhere else. And I predict they're going to move to your supply chain. Fast forward a year, we come back, we do the same assessment. Guess what? There's hardly any meaningful traffic, meaningful attacks against the same place we saw before. We asked for 15 or 20 of their major suppliers, and guess what we see? We see them just getting pounded, right? Because if I can breach the person who delivers that loaf of bread into your organization and you have a payment system that you share, I can come across that payment system coming in that way, I'm going to do that, right? I think we need to think more and more about that and understand where our weaknesses is, right? So you look at somebody like Lockheed Martin and the F-35, right? They've got 30,000 plus suppliers for it. I know for a fact that some of those are sub 30 people companies that do something really specialized. How do you help a 30-person company defend against the latest attacks from an APT group, right? We have to find a way to extend our security blanket to our suppliers. We have to start helping them. And in fact, we're seeing in some of the latest compliance and legislation that you can be held responsible for your supply chain. So we need to find new and innovative ways to do that. We need to help them get visibility in the threats that matter and kind of take, a approach of wrapping a warm cyber blanket around them and going, hey, you're supplying to us and you're important to us. And if you get breached, I get breached, we're in this together. Let me extend a hand to you as opposed to an anchor, right? Instead of throwing them another compliance check off sheet, let's actually send them something that can help them and protect them. So I'm in a big agreement that supply chain is a big problem.
Yeah, Roger that. John, like
I
from a
saw a
defensive
comment.
standpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw a comment go by here, kind of trying to catch up. Lots of comments. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Uh, at the beginning of the year, I think we saw one of the largest scale ransomware attacks ever with Clop, and the way it was done, it wasn't done as a like a direct targeting of individual organizations. The whole compromise started off through the supply chain, and through that they were then able to successfully compromise. I think it was like 450 or 500 organizations or victims, through that attack. And so you have, adversaries learning and innovating and realizing supply chains the place where they can have tremendous scale. And now we have these proof points kind of proving it out. And Clop as an example, that group in particular has kind of gone this supply chain path. I think maybe like four different campaigns, if I remember correctly, where they've had successful, large impact attacking the supply chain. And as defenders, we all see it. Attackers see it too, and they'll absolutely be leveraging that for scale.
Yeah. 100%. All right. Here we go. Number 10. Um, the prediction is that the industry's obsession with converged platforms will finally bust. This is another one of mine and is a special place in my heart. I am not the biggest fan of giant converged platforms and giant vendors for a lot of reasons that are personal, in having dealt with them for the last 30 years, but for more practical reasons as well, right? Convenience is not security in the same way that compliance is not security. Um, Translation layers between tools that were never meant to talk to each other. In a lot of situations, you create more problems than you solve. But somehow vendors are able to market that converged platforms look really attractive for the counter arguments. Why worry about translation layers between disparate tools when you just let us do everything? And I'm not going to name names, but you know who some of these vendors are. The problem with the converged platform has always been and continues to be that one size never fits all when it comes to cybersecurity. But that's not it. Large converged platform vendors aren't concerned with adversaries or outpacing adversaries. They are concerned with outpacing financial markets. They are concerned about profits and market share because that helps them drive more acquisition and that gives them more grasp over the industry and the ability to set direction, and the ability to spend money to market those things to you as consumers. Um, Not necessarily through the lens of we deeply understand the threat environment and therefore we're building products that everybody can use to defend against those threats. So that sounds, I don't know, a little nasty, but I feel that it's true. Um, you know, True threat informed defense cannot occur when you are not in control of your controls. Anyone who's gone through the sales cycle with a giant vendor and you wind up locked in with a converged solution, and then the next thing that they come out with, which is their new giant marketed AI, super smart SIM, blah blah blah, something something. You get the marketing materials, it looks really good. You bring them to the office, you get a great demo, you wind up spending $1 bazillion on the thing, and you never operationalize it because it doesn't fit in your environment in the way that you needed to. So what do? You start getting rid of some of your niche solutions and your point solutions that actually work, and you replace them with the next converged thing, the next acquisition, and this vicious cycle repeats. In my theory, I think that's about to reverse itself. Um, and I'm not saying like the startups will rise up and overtake the cybersecurity industry once again. I'm saying true practitioners who are understanding how to prioritize and validate and remediate and mobilize what it is they're trying to do, understand where they need to focus from a control standpoint, and also understand that spending $1 million on a converged platform is not necessarily going to align with what it is that you are prioritizing for. It's my opinion. John, what are your thoughts on that?
Um, I think it's, as you say, a bit cyclical in nature, and I think that kind of the pace of innovation right now is going to drive a bit of the sort of tendency back towards a little bit of decomposition away from that sort of converged single solution. So I think I always look at it as like what are the factors that are going to drive change? I think that when you just look at that pace of innovation that's happening today, that will be a big driver here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Paul, thoughts?
So just thinking about this, right? I've been in the industry 30 plus years, so I've rode this wave once before. Um, just like cloud computing, we used to call it, mainframes and time sharing. Um, looking at this and thinking about this, I think one of the things that needs to happen is as an industry, we've tried to bring out some standards for things and how we store information, share information, gather telemetry. I think it's going to become important that the vendors we buy from, right, the Palo Altos, the Fortinets, and that, the Microsoft Windows, the Linux distros, and the people like that, that they provide a standard, easy plug and play way that I can take and put in the thing that works best for me. So, someone made a comment in the comments about, their washing machine being compromised and sending 5 gigs of data to China. The goal of that washing machine is to make clothes clean. And I'm going to switch in and out my fabric and fabric softeners as they got better, right? I don't use borax anymore. I use Tide HE because it's the best thing now. Who knows? Tomorrow maybe Tide ZZ. I don't know. But I still want my washing machine to work. I still want my clothes to be clean. But we need to make it easier for our companies and the people buying our products to be able to use the one that fits their solution best, but still provide visibility and protection. And I think we can achieve all of those things by, as an industry, pushing for standardization, standard ways to do things. And then, when you buy that endpoint, do you support this standard that allows me the flexibility I need to pick the solution that best fits my needs?
Yeah. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. Some good analogies in there too. So that's it, folks. That's all 10 of our predictions. I wish we had a whole nother hour. It would have been great to stretch out these topics quite a bit more. Um, but that being said, great chat, great comments from everybody. Um, Thanks again for attending these webinars. It's been a great, 6 months of doing this, and look forward to a lot more great stuff in the new year. And just want to say, happy holidays to everybody. Be safe and be threat informed, and take a day off. Y'all deserve it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care now.